Hello and welcome to the Show Up Dad, where we explore fatherhood and share insights to support dads being present for their families. I'm your host, David Mendonca, and today we'll be talking about family, children, and their roles as fathers. But before we start, I want to thank our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Tall Man Equipment, your go-to source for quality tools and equipment in the power line industry. Visit tallmanequipment.com to see their selection of tools. I also want to give a shout out to the Show Up Dad Foundation, dedicated to helping fathers become more engaged in their families through workshops and community support. To learn more about our mission, visit showupdadfoundation.org. Today, I want to welcome Nick Jonsson. He is a passionate advocate for mental health and awareness. He's made books and does speaking engagement, emphasizing the importance of mental well-being for leaders to perform at their best. He shares his own experiences with executive loneliness and provides practical tips for managing stress, anxiety, and depression in the workplace. He also created the book named after the same title, Executive Loneliness, The 5 Pathways to Overcoming Isolation, Stress, Anxiety, and Depression in Modern Business. He is a certified Chief Master Coach and a certified ICF coach. He excels in both coaching and empowering business leaders to enhance their effectiveness. He's married with a son, aged 15, and he stands as a testament to the power of resilience in the human spirit. Welcome to our show, brother.
Thank you so much, David. It's great to be here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, go ahead and share with our audience, Nick. You got a great resume. I would like for you to just go ahead and share with us your story and how you got to where you're at and what you do to help men overcome loneliness and depression and stuff like that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So while that resume sounded absolutely wonderful, thank you so much, David. My life looked a little bit different if we're going back, 7 to 10 years ago. I went through a bit of a crisis myself. Perhaps I had just turned 40 years of age, and maybe it was a 40 years crisis, but it just seemed like all the issues that had accumulated in my life was coming all over me at once. I felt lonely and isolated at my work. I couldn't keep up. I started to make mistakes, and rather than being terminated, I thought it's better I resign. With that, I found myself even more lonely and isolated. Started to jump from job to job, and to cope with all the stresses of that and losing my finances and so on, I used alcohol as a coping mechanism. That eventually brought me to my knees and even more isolated and lonely. And with that, I filed for a divorce with my ex-wife as well. And that separated me from my son, who was 5 years of age at the time. So that's where it all started, David. That was the dark side, the backside of the resume, perhaps.
Wow. Just like when it didn't look like it could get any worse, it just seemed to like spiral out of control. And that seems to be what usually happens with men. I mean, I've heard so many stories of just losing your job, losing your identity. Now you're taking it out on your loved ones, and then that relationship goes to hell, and it's just sad. It truly is sad that this affects so many men.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I've heard that from many men as well. It doesn't matter where we are in the world. It's just a universal thing. And so I think it'd be wonderful to explore with you, what is it then that makes us men go down that path, and how can we overcome it? And that's perhaps what I dedicated now my last 7 years of and made it sort of my mission.
Well, how did you overcome it? Like, you hit this rock bottom, correct? How did you pick yourself back up? Like what changed in your life? If you don't mind.
Yeah, so for about 3 years, I was going down, 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 and it's a downward spiral in all regards. Everything was getting worse. As financials, worse was getting job was getting worse. With that, my health was deteriorating. And I guess I hit my kind of rock bottom. We have to hit perhaps a stage where we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that was the stage that I hit. And that's when I decided to open up and started to ask for help. I didn't ask for help for 3 years. I used all my energy to protect myself so that no one should find out what was going on internally. I didn't do anything. I didn't speak to anyone. But once I took ownership for this, and at that time I had met a woman who today is my second wife, my new wife. We are married 7 years now. And when I asked her to sit down on the sofa and listen to me, and I just spoke honestly for the first time in my life, really discussing and sharing my feelings, that was the beginning of the return. And of course, it's much more to it, but that was the first point. So it was speaking up and asking for help.
So is what we like to call it in the Christian community, letting God take you into deep waters,
Yeah.
hitting that rock bottom, right? Yeah, that was the catalyst. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, that's where we got to go. And I think a lot of times that's the only way God can get our attention. You know, with a lot of the men I've dealt with, and myself included, sometimes you got to hit that rock bottom for transformation to take place, you know, and it's painful. But when you're constantly, and I know I'm not speaking on you, but like for myself, when you're pointing the fingers at everybody, you know, you got to look at that mirror and you got to be like, okay, what can I learn from this? Now, why is this happening? You know?
Yeah, David, you said it very rightly there. I remember, really being afraid of people, hating people, not trusting people. And I came across a quote by Mark Twain, I remember that year. And it said something along the lines of, the more I get to know people, the more I like my dog. And I remember printing that, and I wrote under that also, I added, and I don't like dogs, because that's actually true. I'm a bit scared of dogs. So that was the space I was in. I didn't trust anybody. When you have a mindset like that, then all you do is just relying on yourself. I didn't rely on any other people. I didn't rely on God. I was just keeping it all to myself. And that's a very, very painful place to be.
Yeah, it is. It eats you alive. I know a lot of people who have committed a suicide over the years, and they never talked to anybody about it. They just internalized it. And from past guests I've talked to, they say that the way men deal with depression is it comes out in anger. And it's like having a tube of toothpaste that has a lid on it. And when you're rolling it from the bottom, it just bursts everywhere, right? And it gets on everyone, all your loved ones, everything. And that's kind of like the way our culture has us set up as men is suck it up. You know, don't tell anybody. You don't want anybody to think you're weak or anything like that. And I think it's causing a lot of men to commit suicide. I really do. You know, that loss of hope, if that makes sense.
Yes, I fully agree, David. And I've seen similar at my end. And actually, what happened 1 year after I had started to speak up was that I lost a friend to suicide, and I had exactly the same thoughts as you said, and I was wondering what would have happened if he would have had the same opportunity to just share what was on his mind. And in fact, before he died, I had seen him for coffee just a few days ago, and he just shared about the good things that was happening in his life, the opportunities, a trip he had been on, but he didn't share anything about any of the challenges that was going through in his life. And I remember thinking to myself, maybe if I would have self-disclosed a bit and shared about the dark hole I would have been in, then maybe he would have opened up. And of course, with that, I put some guilt and so on myself. But after that, I sort of worked more on that. How can I proactively help other men open up?
Now with this newfound knowledge that you have of overcoming this dark spot and everything like that, do you feel that you are more apt to picking up or recognizing it in the spiritual realm? We call it discernment. Are you able to see that in men in your work now?
I find it still quite difficult to see it in men. I believe we are very, very good at masking it. But I have become much better at sending out signals in portions to all the men in my community and surroundings that I am a safe place, and that it's okay to be vulnerable. And I keep self-disclosing so that people can self-disclose to me. And I have people almost on a weekly basis now coming and opening up in portions to me. And I give them all ways to do that, including emails, WhatsApp messages, Facebook messages, booking a call with me, a virtual coffee meeting in person. I give them so many options by just sharing in general terms. If there is anything on your mind, I'm here to listen to you as a human being. And there are increasingly men who's taking me up on that. And that is the first stepping stone. That was what saved me. And I can tell that it's also saving others. Otherwise, as you say, David, ultimately at the end of the spectrum, if it's not dealt with, never spoken about, sadly, too many times, it end up in suicide.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you said safe space, because you're absolutely right. You definitely don't want to open up to somebody about your vulnerabilities if they're not safe. And I liken that to having discernment and wisdom about that person. If that person is a gossiper, you know what I mean? You probably don't want to share with them your deep, dark secrets, right? Shame will make it even worse. But at the same token, if that person is safe, like you said, use your discernment. I mean, obviously, you have to have that wisdom to be able to find people that you can trust with the secrets that you have that is going on inside you. Otherwise, it can actually backfire.
Yeah, we got to be very careful where we disclose, and it has to be a safe space indeed, because the last thing we want is to come in and be over vulnerable in the workplace and creating rumors. As you said, it's just going to make what was bad will just become worse. So picking our spots and on a one-on-one level first, I find is working well. That's what I did. So I spoke up to my second wife. She took me to a doctor, which is supposed to be a safe space. It was a safe space. The doctors listened with empathy, could help with medication and so on. And then after that, we went to a common friend, a female who we knew had gone through some mental health issues a few years earlier. And again, we opened up to her. So within 24 hours, my story was shared 3 times. And every time it was shared, while it was painful in one aspect, it was like something was just lifted from me. And there is that saying, a problem shared is a problem halved. And I could literally feel that every time my problem was shared, I was feeling better. And even sharing now today, talking to you here, David, and with listeners about my story and the pain that was going through my life in 7 to 10 years ago, that phase, something is sort of lifted from me. So it is part of the healing, I think, for the rest of our lives, to share about the challenging times we've gone through. And every time we do it, we're sort of healing. And we're also perhaps, hopefully, helping others. So for that, I'm grateful that I have a chance to share today. And I, again, want to send that message to anyone who perhaps are listening to this message, to think about who is it that you can share it with, who is the safe space. And if you don't need to trust and have 10 or 20 safe spaces, it's enough with one person, just one person. And if we don't have that friend, then there's coaches, mentors, there's therapists, there's volunteers, so many wonderful organizations. And of course, you have people like yourself, David, right? Who people can open up to.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about this topic, because I was just doing a Bible study about the book of Job, which is probably one of the most dreaded books in the Bible that a lot of people avoid. I mean, here's this guy who the Lord called righteous, right? There was none like him. And in this story, Satan comes and kind of makes a wager with God, saying, hey, the only reason why he is a righteous man is because you have a hedge of protection around him. Right. And that we can go all into a whole different aspect about that hedge of protection and stuff like that. But needless to say, God allowed Satan to touch him. Right. He allowed him to do what he needed to do, as long as he didn't kill him. And man, the Bible doesn't really depict how fast it happened. But before one messenger had just delivered bad news that all his oxen were destroyed by this and that there was a raiders who stole all his camels, and all these different things. Before they had even finished, he got struck with 4 other calamities. The last one being that a big wind came and collapsed the home where all his children were in, and it killed all of them. So he lost every single thing. And that's kind of like what the enemy does. He'll attack your marriage, he'll attack your finances, he'll attack your health, and he'll attack your family. That's how he attacks. He doesn't recreate. He has no ability to do so, but those are the things that he will attack you in. And it's been shown since the beginning of time. And you ask men today, men that I deal with, it's either one of those four. It's either their marriage, their health, their finances, or their children. And those are the things that God allows the enemy to do to get our attention, I believe. In that instance, Job got sifted bad, right? He got sifted. But at the same token, his friends came because we need community. They came, they sat with him, they tore their clothes, and they grieved with the guy. After that, it gets kind of bad because now all of a sudden they start speaking out of context. They start speaking out of line, and they start justifying that, hey, man, maybe it's because you have hidden sin. And they start talking about things they don't even know. And I think that was a great indication for us who read that book that sometimes we don't know why God does the things he does. His ways are way higher than ours. But we have to trust God in those trials. And we have to, as people who are listening, and this is very important, guys who are listening, when someone opens up to you, just be that empathetic ear. We don't know what's going on. Don't try to act like you're smarter. Don't try to justify what's going on. Nothing. Just be there for that person and sit with them in that pain.
That was wonderfully said, David, and I completely agree with you. It's about being a listener and letting that person speak and voice what is there. And what I found, if anything, after they have spoken, after I've been there, I would ask this, what I call a magical question. Is there anything I can do for you to support you? To that open question, let them decide if they want something. Many times they say, no, it's good, thank you for listening. Other times they might say that it's something, but rather than us guessing, why not just ask them? At least letting them know that we're there for them if they want us to do something.
Yeah, I think that's important, right? Because instead of assuming that they want you to have an answer for them, just ask them. Man, I never even thought about that. That's actually pretty awesome.
Yeah, much easier, also less pressure on us also, right? We've been a good listener, so let's just hear them out and say, is there anything I can do to support you?
Absolutely. And a lot of times what I've learned through our counseling and stuff like that, biblical counseling, is that just listening to somebody, they already have the answer. They already do. You're giving them a space to be able to talk out their problems out loud to somebody, and they're working it out. They're working out the problem because they don't even understand it at the time, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be talking about it. It wouldn't be on their forefront of their mind, right? So while they're talking it out, they're actually kind of rationalizing it and kind of seeing where they're going to go with it. And then I've had them actually tell me, "Oh, thanks for listening, man. I got this." It's like, I didn't even do anything. I was just here listening. You know what I mean? So I think that's pretty awesome, that how our mind works, the way God has created us,
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And it is about being there, listening, showing that we care, just for them to know that they have a safe space. And what I also found is that maybe they are not ready to share anything. Just the fact that they were sharing the story and started the journey, that's good enough. Even if they don't say much, no need to press, no need to push, because then it might just shut them down again. Give them that space, hear them out, and then see if you can set another appointment only. Do you want to catch up on for lunch or coffee another day? Should we go for a walk this weekend? Are you available? Because surely if they have that appointment in the calendar, a few things, positive things will happen, is that they will start thinking again. They will get some confidence of the first experience when they shared something with you, and they will start thinking about, what else should I share? What else should I ask? And that is what is needed, and that's creating that hope, and they're starting to be on a path of recovery. So having a second appointment I found very useful, and at least just letting them know that we're available if they want to catch up for something, or perhaps even what I did with one gentleman who was going through something difficult a month ago. I had a meeting with him where they did self-disclose, and then I thanked him greatly for it. And then 2 days later, I followed up with him and said, thank you so much for sharing. And then I asked the question, anything I can do for you? Feel free to see this chat group between you and me as a safe space. Anything more you want to share apart from what you shared when we met, feel free to write here. I'll be here for you if you want to meet up for another coffee, or if you want to have a chat, just letting you know that I'm there for you. That is an open invitation also, and some may take you up on it, others may not, and that's fine.
Yeah, for sure. How often do you find that men don't open up? once you've given that opportunity? Are you seeing that men are starting to become more aware of mental illness, or do you feel like there's still some challenges behind that with men opening up?
A vast majority, I see that they continue from there on. They open up more one-on-one level first. And what I typically have held it is one-on-one. Let's say if they open up to me at least for a few weeks or a month, that can be fine already, unless they're in a very, very bad place and sick and they need to perhaps see a doctor or getting some medication, and then perhaps give them some support and guidance there if they're ready and if they ask for it. But otherwise, typically after a month or so, if they are, I would start being a bit curious and asking them, thank you for sharing everything with me, and is there anyone else who should know this? Anyone else in your life that you trust? And typically for the man, it could be that they have a wife who perhaps they haven't had the courage to share with yet. Maybe they have a mother or a father alive, or they might have a very, very close friend. So at least planting the seed is what I typically do there, for them to start thinking about this as someone else that I should disclose to. And what happened with another guy who opened up to me about 2 months ago, by this stage now, he has also opened up to his wife. He has also shared with his mother, and he has one male friend for 20, 30 years who he shared with. So he now has 4 people, including me, who he feels at least understood by and listened to. That is his start of his recovery.
Nick, how often do you find people that are in denial of, say, medicine? You know what I mean? I know a lot of people are in denial that they actually need that type of help. What have you seen?
I have not seen that so much. I was born in Sweden, educated in Australia, and I live and work most of my time in Southeast Asia. And I guess the culture in Asia is that doctors prescribe medication very easily. And you can actually, every apartment building almost have a doctor on the ground floor, which you can walk into, and they prescribe you anything, which is good and bad, of course. But in this instance, people have a quite easy relationship to go to a doctor, which was why that happened to me also on my first day when I started my recovery. But what I've seen in the Western world is perhaps that it's a bigger mission. It's a bit harder to get an appointment. It's a bigger step, and it feels a bit more formal many times. So therefore, from what I heard from some Western men, that it sits a little bit deeper there.
Okay, yeah. I also see too, I think a lot of times pride, right? Pride keeps people from saying, okay, well, I don't have a problem.
Mm.
It's not me. I don't know what you're talking about. Go ask them or whatever.
Yeah. If there's denial there, then people wouldn't even be open for medication. And also, what medication would they need if they are full denial and they're not speaking, they're not sharing about it? Then indeed, people tend to find ways to cope, which are in another way. And we're talking here with any addiction, including alcohol, drugs, sex, and social media, and all these kind of things, which people are using as coping mechanism.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said coping mechanism, because that's what I've seen too. A lot of times you fall back to your programming, what you learned from the ages of 0 to 7 years old, and you fall back to that, and whatever you're shown there is what you're going to start acting out and start doing in your own life. So if you saw your parents not having any accountability, never saying, never taking any kind of responsibility, then guess what? That's what you're going to fall back to as well, because that's what you're taught. And like I say all the time, it's much more caught than taught.
Yeah, I fully see that also, David, and I think it's very important for us men. And you touched on the word community earlier, that we find ourselves community as soon as we're sort of cracked open and we start to become a little bit vulnerable. We trusted one person where we shared with first, then we have it shared with a couple of people, and once after that and that's what I ask myself: where can I now find a community where I can share? Perhaps both mixed groups and also with men only. And I was blessed that I had an alcohol problem in that sense, because I needed help to stop my alcohol addiction. And I'm grateful to be sober 7 years now. And I found it in one of the 12-step programs that are helping alcoholics. And in there, I then found another safe space, both to share in a mixed group with both men and women. But what I dug down on was the men's groups. And you have men's groups online, you have men's groups on the Sundays. I used to show up every Sunday morning for a men's group and meeting other men to sharing what's going on. And with that, I built even more trust, and I was listening to other men's story and so on. And then what happened a few years ago was I was again thinking what I shared here, that I was blessed that I had an alcohol problem, because otherwise I wouldn't have found this community. Then I was thinking, what is it then for all the other men who don't have an addiction, who don't have this alcohol problem? Where should they go? What is the safe space for them? Where is a community for them? So with that, I myself formed a men's group where I invited the men in my life, and that group has grown. We meet on Zoom because we're spread around the world, but we also have a group chat where we share every morning. We share our gratitude list, some things we are grateful for to have a positive start of the day. We also share readings, materials, book reviews. We share also if there's something on someone's mind. We encourage everyone to share if you're going through a difficult time. It can be anything from someone struggling with a company who is facing bankruptcy or whatever, that we can raise it in the group, and the guys will be there to support each other. So that has been helping me and been helping the men a lot. So I think a message to everyone is think about also, is there a community which you can belong to, especially with men then?
Yeah, no, I agree. You definitely need that tribe, that community. Nick, how often have you seen, because we know that addictions are secondary, right? Psychology has already depicted that. We see that through the Bible. These are secondary things. There's always a root. And in order to, if you don't like the fruit, you got to destroy the root, right? What I've seen in our counseling is that there's a lot of father and mother wounds that haven't been addressed, and that leads to these secondary addiction, or fruit as we call it, right, of alcoholism, pornography, sexualism, all these different things, right? What have you seen as far as that goes, as far as father and mother wounds? Has that been pretty prevalent?
Yeah, it seems like the addiction was one form of an escape from facing the reality. And
Hmm.
that was certainly the case for me. It was that for many years I had not worked on underlying issues, not discussed my insecurities. And once you then sober up, then you become quite exposed. So it's very important to have the right support community when someone is breaking an addiction, overcoming or working on the addiction, because doing that in silence is just going to be too painful. And that's why people are relapsing, to find that comfort again, find that escape that sort of works for them as a coping mechanism. It takes deep work. It takes clearing the addiction, but having trusted sources who've been there. That's why in the 12-step program, there's a sponsor, someone who's gone through the journey, who's there. And there's a reason why it's step by step. You go step by step. And there's also that saying, right, 24 hours a day. When someone's coming in, it's almost like 1 hour a day. It's just keep going just for now. And the community support is so important in that. Otherwise, it doesn't work. But once you have then removed addiction, it's about doing that inner job as well.
Yeah, I like that you said the 12-step program and having someone walk with you. That's actual the biblical term for discipleship, right? You are discipling, walking through this person through training. You're literally right there helping them, through their journey. And I think that's awesome that the 12-step program utilizes. And I know that they were rooted and grounded in Christian theology. And it's good to see that they still utilize the same principles that we use today, which, is part of the Great Commission: go and make disciples of men.
That's beautiful and wonderful and so important indeed, because it is about having someone to guide you through it. And because that is sort of lacking also. If you look at the community these days, and if you're thinking back in the days, then the father played a bigger role, the grandfather played a bigger role. Perhaps when you were out farming, they were there to hand you, and you become a man that way. That has disappeared in the community. And perhaps that was what I was lacking myself in my teenage years. I didn't have a good role model. It was more me and my teenage friends and the things that we did, the naughty stuff we were up to. That was my teenage years. And perhaps I never grew up, and I needed that kind of father figure in my life. And that came through the structure of the recovery program then for me. And that was something that I was lacking. So it's almost like I was a teenager inside, but I was 40 years of age.
Yes, and I've seen that so many times, just even through our counseling. They actually go back to where they got stuck. It's weird. They'll start dressing a certain way, they'll start acting a certain way, start talking a certain way. And it's almost like they revert back to that place where they got stuck, and it takes a person that can walk back with them to that point to actually bring them through healing to where they can actually understand and say, hey, give this to me. You don't need to carry this no more. It's okay. You only knew what you knew, and I see it with a lot of trauma victims, where they have to go back and walk you through. I'm dealing with that right now with a therapist myself. And, man, it brings great insight, and, another one too that I like to use is, EMDR. I think EMDR is absolutely amazing, especially with deep trauma and stuff that's happened, that you cannot let go of, stuff that's happened to you. So I think those are pretty good tools that we can use as men, to go back and try to fix the things that are going on inside of us that God has clearly shown us through his word, where he's come to heal the brokenhearted. And he uses people and tools like that to be able to do that, the word of God. So I think that's pretty awesome. What about now, Nick, like through your program and your group that you have, how many men are being successful right now, like who are actually walking through this? Are they able to disciple other men after getting the healing themselves? Is it like one of those ripple effect type deals?
Yeah, so I have about 22 men in the group as of now. And what I'm grateful to see is that they're communicating increasingly between themselves also. There's a lot of sort of smaller pockets of men who catch up online if they find they have some common challenges. Some are entrepreneurs and so on, and entrepreneurs have some offline catch up supporting each other, which I'm grateful for. And I've seen them grow over the last 2 years since we had it structured, that they're becoming more trustworthy, they're becoming more vulnerable, opening up step by step more. They are also there for others. In fact, one of the men I was going to catch up with yesterday, just before our catch up, he said, Nick, I'm with my neighbor now. He's going through a difficult time. So I think, when we have found a safe space, we start to look out for others as well. Before we have the tools, and if we haven't sorted out ourselves, if we haven't gone through this ourselves, then we are unlikely to spot it, and we wouldn't be able to help them or be there for them either. But definitely it is a ripple effect. And that is the positive thing with you having this show, of course, David, as well. And for all the communities we have where we can share and be vulnerable, and sending this message of encouragement for everyone to think about what is your vulnerable space that you can trust, where you can start to share something that's going on in your mind.
Now, I want to take it back a little bit to where we talked about in the opening about executive loneliness. Now, me being a foreman and a GF, I knew that was one of the most loneliest times of my career. You went from being a lineman, right? One of the most awesomest jobs you could possibly have. And everybody wants to hang out. You're riding in the bucket truck or whatever. You got your apprentice or you got the other lineman. You guys are, you know, shooting, guff at each other or whatever, and next thing you know, you're the boss and you're in the truck and no one wants to hang out. It's like, okay, now you're on the other side and it gets lonely. So why is that? Why do you think that when you start getting up to those upper positions that it starts getting lonely?
Yeah, indeed, it can be lonely at the top. And I think if we just look at it if we also climb an organization, when we are, let's say, if we are in a big MNC, a big company, at your manager level, there might be, hundreds in your office at your level. And globally, maybe you have thousands at your level. So you will have others who have similar job descriptions, similar challenges. You meet with them over coffee or lunch and you discuss it. But then perhaps as you just start climbing, the higher you go in the organization, the less people it will be at that office. And perhaps if you reach a VP level, it might be 10 or 20 in your organization at that level. You still have a few. But once you reach that top position, then it is perhaps only you at that level. And that's in a big organization. And of course, you're an entrepreneur. If you are a solopreneur, then it's only you. You don't have anyone at your level who understand your unique challenges, your position, and what you're in. So therefore, what I found is that as lonely as a CEO of a large company can be, it can also be equally lonely for an entrepreneur or business owner. And what we need to do then, of course, is that we need to find others at that level externally, which is perhaps something that we not naturally do. But what I'm referring to, of course, is mastermind groups, peer groups, and so on, where we can actually discuss our work-related challenges with like-minded. That is something that I didn't do when I went through my challenges. I also didn't reach out to mentors and coaches. In fact, if I'm looking back at my most senior role when I was a general manager running hospitals and clinics, there was 1,400 staff in my organization. And I was given a mentor, someone who was more senior than me, sitting in another office overseas. But I remember seeing these calls with my mentor as a way to impress him, to make sure that when he spoke to my boss, that he would give a good review. Yeah, Nick is on track, he's doing well, so that I would be set up for my next promotion or pay rise or whatever it was. That was my intention. I did not prepare these calls by thinking, what are the challenges I have now? What would I like to discuss that he can help me with? Because that would show weakness. That would show that I don't really know my job. So I didn't have those conversations. If I could turn back time, I would have done it differently. I would have prepared for those calls to actually share what I needed help with. I would also have needed an external peer group and mastermind with other GMs, perhaps at my level, similar responsibilities, which I would have trusted to share about the challenges that I was going through, rather than coping with them alone until I crashed.
Wow. Yeah, no, definitely. You got to find, yeah, exactly. Find those mentors and those peers. Yeah, I know. I never really reached out to people at my level. I just kind of like dealt with it because I was still caught up in, well, I'm a lineman, you know what I mean? I'm a lineman and, I wanted to be a part of the guys, but I had to see that, hey, man, even though I'm a lineman and stuff like that, I still have a job to do. I'm still the boss. And, I have to draw that line, because you could be friends and coworkers, but that kind of starts blurring the lines, you know what I mean? Because then all of a sudden it's like, hey, um, such and such did this, and this is your friend, and you hired them or whatever, you know what I mean? And then you got to be boss, and then everybody gets upset and stuff like that. So I tried not to blur those lines ever. Your friends, but work is work, and those two shall not ever have to cross or meet. You know what I mean? And I think if you keep it like that, it makes it a lot easier in that, logistics, business and stuff and work.
Yeah, I agree to keep it clean. And again, as we said, being a bit mindful who we are vulnerable, who do we trust, and where do we build the relationships. But the worst of all is if we don't build any, if we keep it all to ourselves. That's what happened in my case. And actually, as I was reflecting, what was it that happened? In fact, I was a top performer. I was perhaps an overachiever, an anxious overachiever. I worked so hard. I worked long days because I had that inner insecurity. And work was one way to prove myself. So therefore, I was seen as a high performer. But what happened then was that I started to make some mistakes. There were some projects that I was not good at. And I remember it was in Microsoft Excel, some spreadsheets. We were bidding for some big new projects and business. And I remember feeling overwhelmed that I couldn't really keep up with it. And they started to make some mistakes. And it was just these small little mistakes that gave me the insecurities. And then I started thinking, what else did I make mistake? Is there something there? And with all of those securities and not speaking about them, not even asking someone in the company to please have my back, and they became sort of bigger and bigger. And in my mind, I thought that I would be exposed, someone would find errors, I would be terminated. And I started really to catastrophize, the scenarios. But it was all in my head. But that led me all the way to a resignation from this fantastic job, to everyone's surprise.
Wow. I like that you said it was all in your head. You started, having this dialogue, in your head. And I think a lot of times that's what we do is we have this dialogue, not understanding that it's not coming, it could be you, it could be your flesh, right? With your insecurities, but it could also be, this other voice, this demonic voice. We talk at it from a spiritual aspect, and you could be entertaining demonic thoughts. You really could, and it's up to us to be able to differentiate those voices between us, demonic influence, and also God's voice. God's voice never rushes, and it never, never, never contradicts his word. You know, that's what I tell some of the believers that I deal with when they want to know how to hear from God. I swear, man, even for myself, I can really carry on a conversation about how somebody wronged me and stuff like that. And then I got to catch it and be like, hey, man, is it accusational? If it's accusational, what does the word of God say? It says that the devil is the accuser of the brethren. So that is not from God. And I shouldn't entertain that thought. And I need to take those thoughts captive and cast them down. Otherwise, they will run. Once you give them that little inch, they will take a mile. Next thing you know, you are quitting a job, right? You are slandering somebody or defending yourself against something that you don't even have to defend yourself against. It's pretty interesting how the mind works that way.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I can also say that what I learned in the program, the recovery program, is, of course, about a higher power, a source, God, something that many of us also have rejected, perhaps, as we grow up as teenagers and going through that part of life. And it was also for me to reconnect with the source, which I did thanks to the recovery program, which is built on that, as you said. And that's a journey that has helped me tremendously, including meditation, prayer in my life these days have done a tremendous positive impact.
Now you have your son that's age 15. One of the things I say is, well, walks in fathers, runs in sons, unless we deal with it right. Have you seen your son have that same anxiety? Are you able to recognize it in him, the same anxiety that you had? Or
So if I'm just turning back a little bit, so for 3 years, I was basically a disappearing dad. At that time, I isolated myself in various countries in Asia, jumping from job to job. My ex-wife moved back to Sweden with my son, and I hardly saw him for 3 years. And it was very difficult to connect with a 5 to 8 year old on the phone. And that made me even more depressed, the fact that I couldn't even speak to my own son. But once I then sort of sobered up and started to work on myself, I started to rebuild that relationship. I did that by working with child psychologists, therapists, more for me to work on myself, how to talk to him. And I've taken ownership for my shit. He knows my story, not the full details, but he knows quite a lot about it. I made amends to him, and I've helped him and support him. So the answer is yes, I see some of the insecurities in him, but he also see me these days as a safe space. He shares about the insecurities with me, and we talk about them. There's been issues happening, as for most teenagers in his school, for example. There was his friends and a group of his friends had been caught shoplifting in a shop, and the school reported it to us and so on. And I was then able to step in and not judging him, but being that safe space for him where he could actually share what was on his mind. And as he had spoken for almost an hour, I start to understand the picture that he was caught in a huge dilemma. If he was in the shop stealing things, he was under the risk of that being caught by the police. But if he didn't steal, he was on the risk of being bullied or beaten by his friends. So he was in this hopeless situation, and I was able to, through that, sitting back and asking him questions and asking him to think, what would be the solutions? What options do you have here? And in the end, actually supporting him all the way, that he was the one to decide that he need to move to another school. I was able to have that conversation with my ex-wife, and we supported him all the way through that. And that is just one incident that built a lot of trust, so he doesn't have to walk around with those insecurities. When I grew up as a teenager, I was caught in similar situations, and I certainly didn't share it with my parents. In fact, I was really afraid that they would find out, because that would be my biggest nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. I always told myself that I wanted to be the parent that my children can go to, that they're not going to say, hell no, I don't want to call my dad. He's going to be so upset. I'd rather have them say, hell no, I want to call my dad right now. He'll know what to do. He's a lineman. He'll get me out of a bind. You know what I mean? And not necessarily get him out of a bind, but just help him like you did to be able to make those decisions, because that's part of our job as parents, is to raise our children up with morals, values, and good character, right? And to kind of guide them through life's journeys, gently correcting them where they need correction and training them over time so they can straighten out. Each child has their own bend in them that we need to correct that as parents. And it takes having that trust, like you said, not being judgmental, not arguing with them, not, giving them the finger whipping, and looking at them very angrily. They say that 55% of communication is nonverbal, and that includes the way we look at them. And when we're doing that to our children, we are communicating a message that, hey, it's not safe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I keep building on that with my son now. So he's 15 now, and he just ended what is called compulsory schooling, which is 9 years in Sweden. So now it's up to him what to do. And I would be in the worst position if I'm dictating him at that age what to do. I can just sit back and be that kind of supportive dad and the coach by asking him questions for him to find out his own answers, and letting him know that I'm here if he wants to talk about it. And if he in the end wants my feedback or my suggestions, I'm happy to give it to him, but he will have to ask me for it, because it's his life, and he's a big boy at 15.
One of the things that I think is pretty phenomenal is even with you, right? You earned your son's respect again, per se. You have bridged that gap to make it, a safe place for him to talk to you, which is awesome. I commend you for that. And now I think, like, people in your position, from what I've seen, it's important to go to him and be humble and be like, look, man, forgive me. I hate the word I'm sorry, because sorry is when you bump into somebody or you step on someone's toe, right? But when you actually go to your children, you say, please forgive me. I messed up. There is so much healing and freedom in those little words right there. Please forgive me. And when you're able to humble yourself and do that, it just changes everything about your dynamic with your child. I was able to do that with my daughter, who had a pretty awful relationship with her growing up, because like you, I was on the road all the time, wasn't at home. And when I did come home, I didn't know how to self-regulate. I didn't know how to be a father. So I fell back to what I learned at home, and also what the culture that I lived in was. At the time, my wife would tell me, don't be in lineman mode. We're not linemen. Don't yell at us. Don't talk to us like that. I'd get very excited, and I had to learn to be able to become that safe space and, create that space like you did, and then be able to go later on in life and be like, man, please forgive me. I did not know. And once I did that, that opened up a deeper relationship with my daughter, to where it's just such an amazing blessing to have her. She is the light of my life. When they say a daughter is a father's best friend, it is absolutely true.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And David, that's also part of the recovery programs. Actually, one of the steps there is to make amends, and to set things right. And we encourage them to even get out a pen and paper and write down the names of all our closest relatives, relationships, parents, children, and the closest relationships we have in our life, and then think through if we've done some harm to them. And then with the help of a sponsor, we prepare to go and make those amends. and take ownership for the shit we done, so we can clean it up. And it's a process of cleaning our side of the street. And if they accept that apologize, that's not in our control. But at least what we can do is to clean it up and setting things as right as we can. And that's a journey that I went through, and I helped many men to go through as well. It's wonderful to see the effect of that, because many times perhaps it's some unspoken words. It could even be perhaps in the case of a neighbor that we didn't speak to for a few years because a small incident happened. But just to go over there, with a box of chocolate and say, I apologize for, the way I spoke to you a few years ago. And I just want you to know that I really mean it, and would hope that you can forgive me and that we can move forward from here. And if you do that to your neighbor, then most of the time they'd be welcoming that box of chocolate, and they give you a hug, and it'd be like the old days again rather quickly.
Yeah, for sure. You got to be able to ask for forgiveness. That's a command. A lot of people don't understand, but the Bible says that you have to forgive. It's not a prerequisite or anything. It's directly a command. You have to forgive, and that forgiveness is not for them, it's for you. It is literally for you to set yourself free. You know what I mean? From holding on to bitterness or resentment and all the things that come from holding on to that anger. It says that bitterness defiles a man. And I've seen that evident in a lot of people's lives. It goes from something as simple as, I don't know, an expectation that wasn't met. Now they're angry. Now that anger turns to bitterness. And then now that bitterness turns to full on resentment. And now that is just defiling everything, ruining families, every single thing. And it's sad to see when when it gets out of hand that way. It is.
Yeah, and it can easily happen if we don't actually get a grip, and that we have some kind of guidelines and structure to help us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Nick, if there's we're running out of time now, brother, but if there's any bit of advice that you would like to give to our listeners right now, it'd be your opportunity to do so, brother. And I'd love for you to share that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, David, for having had me on your show. And I think, the call to action that I would encourage everyone who's been listening here today is perhaps to think first, ask themselves, do they have something that is giving them some pain inside? Do they have something that is keeping them awake at night? Or perhaps when you wake up in the morning is the first thing that comes to your mind. And if that is something that is painful and negative, then perhaps just get a pen and paper out and write down what that is. And then after that, the next thing is just to think about who can I have a trustworthy conversation with about that. It can be a friend, it can be a coach, it can be a mentor, it can be a hotline, or it can be any of the 12-step programs if it's related to an issue, an addiction. And then just take that first step and give a call today or send a message to that person, and just to share it. That is what we've been talking about today. It's about reaching out and asking for help and being a bit vulnerable and trusting the process. And then with that starts a whole new chapter, a positive beginning, and the pain will disappear as we share that. So that is my call to action to anyone who's listening.
Right on. Well, thank you once again, Nick, for coming on here and sharing your story about hope. I look forward to talking to you again. And for our listeners out there, follow Nick Jonsson. He's got his following. It'll be in the show notes as well if you guys are interested in that. And keep showing up for your families, guys. Keep becoming better every single day. And don't forget to reach out to us at FDM Ministries or the Show Up Dad Foundation so we can give you your free PDFs on how to parent God's way. It's great information in there. It's all biblical, and it's help you start your journey and becoming the best father you possibly can. Once again, thank you. This is Dave from the Show Up Dad.